Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Reddit Roasts. I am joined again by John Cheng, who is coming back for a star appearance, and we'll be featuring over the next few weeks a little bit more often as well. Now, today we have an interesting bunch of profiles, slightly weird, I think. We have a national level Ultimate Free player. We have somebody who is also a national level Scrabble player. But this isn't Scrabble school. We're not applying to Scrabble school. We're not applying to Ultimate Frisbee school. This is business school. Will those extracurriculars work in their favor or will they not? Overall today, a real focus on the M7s, on the US M7 programs. So let's dive into profile number one, shall we, John?
Do it.
Cool. So 28-year-old male, 705 GMAT focus, 7.51 CGPA from BITS Polani, worked in City and now at a tech startup at the intersection of supply chain and tech, worked with a bunch of big FMCG clients in India, Nestle, Procter & Gamble, and so on. LORs would be strong. Extracurriculars, very random. Ultimate Frisbee champion, or Ultimate Frisbee represented India, so very, very high level. Also runner-up in state in tennis in India. Top 1% player on chess.com and play a bunch of musical instruments as well. Target schools, Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, M7, T15, even INSEAD in the list. Goals are starting consulting, move to entrepreneurship. In the entrepreneurship world, there's this narrative of I've worked with major players in the industry, I assume that's FMCG, and seen how hard it is for them to carry out digital transformations. I want to be able to build something that helps the big and smaller players to do that. Consulting will give me insights into the broader field and help with my network. Okay, so John, how do you see this profile academically first?
Yeah, I think pretty solid even for this overrepresented pool, Sam. Look, the CGPA is okay, but a 705 translates to about a 750, 760, which is generally pretty strong, among folks in that pool. I would say Indian undergrad colleges are competitive. BITS Pilani is up there. It's not an IIT, but it's pretty strong. We can talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Demographically, again, OPs and ORM. So I would really focus on him working closely with stakeholders from places outside of India. We can talk a little bit about that as well. ECs, look, some may argue that the business tie is not strong, but I love the theme around competitive sport and empowering others in the field. I feel this could be a larger tie-in, if not to his narrative, then potentially to his supplementary essays. Professionally, love the brand names on his resume, even though he works at a startup now. It sounds like he has great working contracts with companies that adcoms will know well. Goals make sense, staying in the same function, focusing on emerging countries. I would love to see a strong reason for why he would want to, he genuinely has a passion for empowering people in emerging countries, because the adcom can see right through you if you don't have that story down, pat. Overall, Sam, a pretty solid profile. I wouldn't say it's A+ tier, but I can definitely see a toe into M7 with a strong narrative. Happy to dive into any of this.
Yeah. Okay. Let's start first academically. You touched on this very briefly. BITS Pilani. How do adcoms, particularly in America, look at the Indian undergrads in, sort of like a tier? What's tier one? What's tier two? How do they think about Indian undergrads?
I would say that, when it comes to reading people from different countries, all schools are going to have a country file. And in that country file, they're going to have their thoughts on which schools belong in which tiers. Over time, experienced readers will get to know, which of the schools that stand out in the region. And obviously, tier one is going to be IIT, but keep in mind that within IIT, there are also different locations and different majors that schools look for, right? So one is more prestigious than the other. There are many different IIT locations. I would say tier one would be IIT. Then just below that, you would have the likes of NIT, and you would also have BITS. So BITS is obviously Berlin Institute of Technology. And again, as it is with the IIT, BITS has multiple locations. Pilani is one of the more prestigious ones, I would say.
Well, I noticed that all of those schools end with a T, right?
Oh, yeah. Technology.
NIT, BITS. It's all technology focused. What about people that aren't engineers?
I would say, working. I mean, there are other great schools that too. I mean, the schools that the schools that do end with T's offer majors that are not necessarily in engineering or in tech. And so, but that's quite rare, actually. I would say for folks graduating from India, I would say the vast majority of people we see, um, OP of people of folks applying from that region tend to be in some tech-related field. There are a handful who do finance, a handful who do economics, but for the most part, it's some kind of engineering.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay, cool. So let's talk about these extracurriculars in a bit more depth. I was joking of how random they are, but I think to be fair, if Harvard and Stanford in particular are looking for that uniqueness, there is something unique about this, isn't there? It represented India at
Mhm.
Ultimate Frisbee. How does, and the same with the chess top 1% player. Now, these are not MBA skills directly, but they do
Mhm.
show a little bit of something. How would you recommend OP to frame and use these extracurriculars in a way that's going to help their business school chances?
Yeah, I think there are so many ways you can do that. You can think about it from an industry perspective, right? Obviously, OP wants to stay in supply chain. But what if OP wants to go into the sporting industry and find a way to, um, disrupt it, disrupt certain processes within sport, or taking the some of the the more interesting and more leadership oriented processes within sport and bringing it to business, right? I'm thinking aloud here, and there's a professor at HBS called Anita Albrese who does all these great lectures around sport, and she invites all these guest speakers who are at the top of the game in the field, and they find a way to tie some of these, they tie sport into business. And so I think there's something there that the OP can leverage. I don't know what exactly it is, but I think there's more there than they think there than they think there is.
It probably lends itself to some pretty interesting essays from maybe a leadership and teamwork perspective,
Absolutely.
right? So HBS Essay 2, as we well know, is a leadership story. Tell us
Mhm.
about leadership story. And a time where, at the competition, at the global world championships of ultimate frisbee, I was representing India against the USA. And we were 1-0 down at half time. And I had to rally the team and here's what I said to rally the team. Like there's a leadership story in there somewhere, for sure.
Absolutely.
So okay, it's not ultimate frisbee school, but it is relevant. And that I think there's something in there is the connection. If it's not career related directly, because nowhere, I think when OP talks about goals, there's a bit about consulting and tech and supply chain, whatever. Nothing, I'm not seeing anything sport related there. So I don't think this is going to work favors on the career goals essay. But for the non career essays, leadership, a mistake essay. I think there's a few really good. It could be really good, fodder for
Mhm.
those essays. Okay, the questions that OP is asking specifically are: question one is, are Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, and the other M7s too dreamy? Are they too dreamy? What's your thought on where do you see OP? What would you consider OP's reach, mid, and safety schools?
I would say the upper M7s, the likes of Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton, are going to be reaches. I don't think OP should not apply to those schools. I will say that the CGPA may be a detractor, but I think some of the lower M7 schools care more about that than the upper M7 schools do, in some ways, because they the upper Harvard and Stanford, they obviously look for very capable, smart, talented individuals, but um, they don't have to play the rankings game quite as hard as the other M7s do, right?
Mm.
And so I would say that the if anything, it's not being a graduate of IIT, because if there's a similar candidate to OP who with similar work experience and this type of extracurriculars, they would rather pick the candidate from a higher ranked school like IIT. But
Yeah.
what is unique about OP is that they have a very unique set of extracurriculars that I think is less likely to be replicated by others. So it's a long-winded way of saying, I think, I think OP should aim for M7s and T10s, maybe a T15 for safety. But I would say that, HSW is still within reach. Maybe it's a Friday, and maybe I'm feeling a little bit more hopeful, but OP shouldn't shy away from those schools.
I I'm aligned. I had a client a couple of years ago who had a world record in some really niche, you know, activity, and we focused that was the only thing that was really unique about their application. Everything else was kind of like this, like kind of solid but not outstanding. And we really focused the application on this world record. And I think like two of the three essays, whatever, like two-thirds of the essays were about this world record in some way. And they got interviewed by Stanford.
Wow.
And I honestly didn't really anticipate it because as everything else in the profile was quite vanilla. But this one very unique thing was enough to just for Stanford to be like, let's roll the dice on this person. Let's interview them. And it was an Indian male as well, actually. So it was a really, there's definitely a comparison here. In the end, that candidate didn't get through the interview, didn't get the offer. Because I think what happened was they realized that this is a one trick pony, right? They've got that one interesting thing, but everything else is a bit vanilla. So I think it'll come down to that kind of balance of how much does this uniqueness work in their favor pre-interview, and then can they back it during the interview? It'll be interesting to see. I agree with you that OP should give the HSW a shot, but for me, the bread and butter is the bottom end of the M7. That's really where they should be focusing, the
Yeah.
Kellogg's, the Booths of the world.
Agreed.
Cool. Okay, should we move on to the next profile?
Let's do it.
All right. So, profile 2. Hello, everyone. After a brutal reality check on September 29th at midday, they are referring, of course, to the HBS interview invites that went out last week. And lots of people, obviously, very disappointed. I want to know if my profile is competitive for MIT Sloan in round 2. I'm open to suggestions. Right, background is 26-year-old male. Now, here's where it gets interesting, John. Sub-Saharan African national. A bachelor's degree in political science, two master's degrees, all top 10 schools in France. Solid GPA. Hasn't translated it exactly, but somewhere like a 3.6 to 3.7 GPA. Test scores are 3.34 GRE with a very, full marks on the quant. IELTS looks fine. Work experience, senior consultant, 4.5 years of experience and matriculation, 3 years in a boutique consulting firm in Africa tied to big clients. Oh, no, sorry, donors, working with donors like the World Bank, Gates Foundation, etc. And 1.5 years at a T3 or 4 international consulting firm in Europe. Pretty unsexy brands there, then I think is what I'm getting from that. Extracurriculars, founded a pro bono consulting to help African NGOs raise funds. Interesting. Served as a project manager in a student pro bono consulting association. Also quite interesting. So the short-term goal is to stay in consulting and pivot to an MBB. Long-term goal is to found a company that provides critical services to people in need in my country. Okay. Not often we get sub-Saharan African national here. John, what do you think?
I like this profile, Sam. I think strong overall. I will start with the academics. Again, pretty solid there. 2 master's degree, kind of a show off, but I like it. That 334 with a 170 is, as we say in our roast, the chef's kiss. So good going there. Demographically, again, as you mentioned, sub-Saharan Africa is rarely seen. I would obviously classify that as URM. I also think, the fact that OP's worked in this region and grew up there, definitely is, the basis for a lot of rich stories that OP can write about and feed into their narrative. Love how OP carries that to their ECs. So strong evidence of giving back. Would love to see more evidence of quantifying impact a little bit more, especially with that pro bono consulting firm. That could be a real game changer. Professionally, boutique consulting, again, focus on impact. Those are pretty sexy brands, I would say. Gates Foundation, the UN, the World Bank. I think, it definitely helps drive legitimacy in the consulting work. And especially when it comes down to pitting OP against others who are part of MBB firms in emerging regions. So yeah, goals wise, I like the honesty there, but it's a little vanilla. I mean, this whole thing about I'm going to do MBB consulting, I'm going to return to my home country and make it better. It's a very overused narrative.
It's
And in
hard.
some cases, it is genuinely true, but I see, okay, energy, healthcare, transportation. You can boil the ocean there, right? And so I would encourage OP to really focus in on hone in on what exactly they can change. And we can talk a little bit about what that is, Sam. Overall, I like the profile. I think with the tighter narrative, I think OP will have a strong shot at many of these schools, including MIT. Sorry to hear about HBS, but that's why there's round two.
Yeah, exactly. And just a clarification, I think this means the undergrad GPA is 3.6. But can you just
Okay.
remind everybody watching how the school will consider your undergrad GPA versus your master's GPA? Which one's more important?
Undergrad GPA is always more important because they take that into consideration when they report GPA averages for schools, and that is a key
The rankings.
driver of rankings. Yes. But
Yeah.
obviously, if you don't do so well in the undergrad, and you do much better in the master's degree, that will at least indicate to admissions readers and the AdCom that you have the capacity to do well in B school, but that won't take away from the fact that they have to register your GPA, provided, of course, it's on a 4.0 scale.
Yeah. Cool. The other thing I'd like to ask you about is you touched on this in your description, and we talked about it in the last roast actually as well. Is OP is leveraging the brands, in this case of donors. In the
Hmm.
roast before, the profile before, the startup had clients like Nestle and
Hmm.
Procter and Gamble. So can you
Sure.
talk a little bit more about how this applicant, even though their own brands where they work are pretty unknown, right? A boutique consulting firm in Africa, the
Hmm.
AdCom probably haven't, well, are
Hmm.
unlikely to have heard of. The T3, T4 in Europe, they might have heard of, but again, it's not going to be
Hmm.
particularly well known. So OP is
Sure.
leveraging the brands of donors or clients or something else that's linked to them to kind of
Hmm.
benefit from those brands. How do schools see that?
I think largely positively, at least I would. I think um, for brand, inevitably, a responsible admissions reader is going to Google the name of your firm and do a little bit of digging. You're doing the legwork for them by reminding them that the work that you do is legitimate and that it's been validated by companies that you know well, World Bank, Gates Foundation, and otherwise. I
Right.
would say that, and that's to answer your first question, Sam. And then to answer your second question about, boutique consulting, I almost think that being a boutique consulting, especially if it's in a niche consulting function, works in your favor better than if you were to work for a well-known consulting firm that is not MBB,
Right.
right? Because then you will very easily be banded in, a tier below or two tiers below what McKinsey band and BCG, and we all know what those firms are. But
What you're
yes, I
saying is
think
there are a billion people
correct.
applying from Deloitte, and there are not many other people applying, presumably from this boutique
Yes.
consulting firm. And so there's a
Hmm.
slight differentiation.
Sure.
Mm, I like it. Okay. Next, I'm interested in this sub-Saharan Africa now idea. I had a client from sub-Saharan Africa last year who got a full ride scholarship to Oxford, which is awesome. So they're going to graduate debt free, absolutely ready to conquer the world. Now, how do you think OP can kind of maximize that unusual background? Right? How can they, maybe in their essays, in their LORs, in their resume, like how can they maximize this to really give themselves a chance and differentiate themselves from the other groups?
Good question. I would say two words, Sam. Lived experience. Some people can talk tangentially about, things going on that they don't have direct exposure to or live around. And it's just, okay, that's what I hear, right? I want to tackle this problem. I'm never really immersed in it. But OP is, right? OP has witnessed firsthand, whether it's the challenges or the opportunities associated with living in a region that, AdCom may know less about. And so transporting the reader to sub-Saharan Africa, explaining what the situation is from their own shoes, and really being showing and not telling is going to what's bring is going to what help brings the story to life here.
That's such a good way of putting it. So I'm thinking maybe for example, the curiosity essay for Harvard. Well, actually, OP's already done Harvard, so forget Harvard. But an essay that is a MIT video, right? Introduce yourself to your classmates. OP could use that video to talk about life in this particular sub-Saharan African country and how that's brought out a particular value of theirs and how that value is going to translate to community contribution at MIT. That
Love
could
that.
be one way of doing it. That's really, really good lived experience. And I guess where this kind of shows up for us as admissions consultants, on a sort of add this anecdote, is we get a lot of people when we're trying to brainstorm a career narrative. We're trying to identify this social problem that they're going to tackle in their life. And the answer that we often get from clients is, I heard that there's a problem over here. Or my grandma, when she was growing up, experienced this problem over there.
Mm-hmm.
Or there was this thing in the news recently where. And these are all problems, but they're not really your problem.
Absolutely not. I've seen so many essays where it's like, I decided to go build houses in this place, and I've seen firsthand the squalor that they experienced, and I want to return and be their savior.
Yeah, exactly. As opposed to, I grew up in this.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a gap there. But at least in your example, at least they have been there and been on the ground. It's not just a
Mhm.
news story. So the takeaway here for anybody watching is your mission, your social challenge that you're hoping to tackle needs to be something that you've lived for it to really be strong. And that doesn't have to be homelessness, right? It doesn't have to be dire poverty. It can be financial inclusion. It can be a healthcare challenge. It can be loads of different things that everybody, unless you've lived an incredibly lucky life, you've experienced something. Cool. Okay, John, the consulting goals. You touched on this before. If OP's current short-term goals are to stay in consulting, join an MBB, first in the US and after in their Africa offices. This is, as we keep banging on about, this is such a vanilla goal. Not that it's that bad, because OP does have a consulting background. They could probably get away with it. But I think there are much more interesting short-term goals that would perhaps lead more neatly into tackling a severe problem in the country. Can you give us some inspiration for short-term goals that might be a bit more unique?
Oof. I mean, I again, rule of thumb that not everyone follows, not a hard and fast rule is, same industry, pivot function, or same function, pivot industry, right? And so if OP wants to stay in sort of the corporate strategy space, OP can consider working for one of the donor partners that they
That'd be
work with,
great.
right?
Be
Working
great, wouldn't
for
it?
Gates Foundation, working for the World Bank. And there are a lot of great post MBA roles available at the Gates Foundation, at places like Gates Foundation that can address different parts of your interests, right? And so
So the World
that
Bank
can
owns the IFC, I believe, and the IFC's Young Professionals program would be a great post MBA goal.
absolutely.
Interesting. So so the narrative maybe that's taking shape here that we're kind of pushing is, I experienced firsthand this particular problem in XYZ sub-Saharan African country. My mission is to tackle this challenge. My short-term goal is to pivot to the IFC or the Gates Foundation, etc., where I will tackle this challenge at scale. My long-term goal is to found my own company that pinpoints this niche and really targets this little niche to tackle that problem for people going forward.
I love that. That's a
Really
very
nice
solid narrative,
and
and
very
it's very
unique and
credible as well.
different. Credible, no consulting, just really purely tackling the challenge. I love it. Okay, so let's get to the nuts and bolts of this. OP, do they have a chance for MIT Sloan in round two? What do you think?
With a strong narrative, and if OP is a good listener, and if OP listens to this video, I think MIT Sloan is within reach for the profile.
I'm looking at it from the group that MIT like to talk about is past performance on one axis, leadership potential on the other axis, and you need to be up here. In other words, you need to do well in both of those. I'm
Mhm.
seeing past performance. We probably show this experience to be, really best in class. And in terms of leadership experience, I think OP has it with this founding and non pro bono consulting firm. So I think OP does score very highly on those two ranks. The only other thing I would say is that historically, the people that I've worked with who've done well at MIT, they tend to be, for want of a better word, quite nerdy. In other words, very like hard skills, very, very strong. And I think OP has that, but I'm not entirely sure. So that's something that would need to come out in the application. But I think I agree with you. I think OP has a chance. Cool. Next profile. All right, let's do it. So, a bit of a short one, but I think we've got most of what we need. 25 years old. I run an app company, decent revenue, couple of million downloads, extracurriculars, Ashoka Changemaker, Schwarzman Scholar, media features, conferences, etc. Computer science engineer, 3.28 GPA from a normal university in my home country. Masters in global affairs from Tsinghua University, Schwarzman Scholar, currently being pursued, targeting M7 schools, Knight Hennessy's and similar scholarships, yet to give the GRE GMAT. So quite an early stage applicant. So given that we don't have, there are a few gaps here. We don't have all the information and OP has not taken the GMAT yet. Can you give this a very high level, sort of early stage evaluation?
This one's okay. I think there are some really good markers of performance and potential with OP given, obviously being a Schwarzman scholar is one of them. I think academically a little bit the 3.2 is a little bit dicey. It is yes within range for M7, but he'll be quite at the bottom of the range, and so that GMAT will work very hard there. Demographically, I don't know what a rare OP comes from. I'm guessing an ORM. Extracurriculars, important to get, these special engagements that OP talks about, being featured by those media houses and the speaker events mentioned, but also focusing less on, who they are and what those appearances have amounted to. So ETs are pretty good overall. Professionally, I think really interesting that OP has founded a company that has generated quite a bit of revenue. It would be nice to know if OP has had a job prior to founding this company, because being a solo founder, and if you worked on this by yourself, it can be a little bit of an echo chamber. It's easy to make up details beyond your revenues, and it would be hard to get objective references that adcoms will use to gauge your performance. Goals wise, obviously goals are not specified, so we can talk a little bit about what that could be. And then overall, I mean, I think there are some interesting components of this profile, Sam. That GMAT or GRE is going to have to work very hard, and I would find ways to quantify and validate the business beyond just the revenue.
Yeah. Yeah, totally aligned. I think I'm a bit wary that, well, OP is a classic candidate for maybe overwhelming with jargon. That's one kind of flag that I want to highlight. I run an app company, and I get the sense as well, maybe from this sort of short, bullety tone of this post as well, that there might be a tendency to be very jargony. So that's one tip
Mhm.
is OP, make sure that you're focusing on the impact of your work. And John just alluded to this, the impact of your work as a little bit goes beyond, a little bit beyond the metrics, right? So 10 from my country, Ashoka changemaker. Yeah, but impact. What impact has that had? Just like John said with the company, sure, 2 million downloads, but what impact has that had? That's what's lacking for me here. I'm not getting a read of the impact. I think there probably is some, but it's not there. I'm not seeing it right now. So OP, beware of of jargon and make sure you focus on the end result. Like we were just talking about in the last video, the impact you're going to have on the world. What impact are you going to have on the world? Right now, you figured out how to make money. Fine. But the business schools are going to ask, okay, now what? And so what? And I think there's maybe a little bit more thinking to be done there. John, you mentioned these LORs. How would somebody, let's assume that OP does not have pre entrepreneurship
Mhm.
corporate experience. We often see I worked at Deloitte for a few years and then I went off and did my own thing. And those people use Deloitte for their recommendations because it's a brand that's recognizable and it was a direct manager, etc. What about entrepreneurs? Who can they use for LORs?
Yeah, that's going to be a little bit tougher, but in most cases, everyone has a master. Who is that master? The master can be an investor. The master can be a key vendor, a key customer, someone who is able to objectively validate the performance of OP and has no vested interest in it, as in a way that, because in some cases, you know, if the recommender is subordinate of OP, that doesn't make sense. It has to be someone who is able to, um, put OP in their place to put it, to put it kindly.
Yeah. Because
And that's what and having an objective assessment of that is going to is going to make that recommendation legitimate, and legitimacy is what's needed for adcoms to believe um, and properly assess how OP is as a leader and the other parts that he talks about in his application.
can you be more granular? Where in a letter of recommendation, where is it that a recommendation that a non yeah, a weak recommender would trip up?
It's probably going to be the second question. Describe a time when you've given constructive feedback to the applicant and how the applicant responded, right? And so it's typically people often think about that as like, oh, what is like the bad quality that I have, and what, all that, like why? But for the most part, schools want to understand not just about why you're not perfect. They also want to understand how you take feedback and what your growth mindset is, right? And so um, for um, um, for applicants to be able to show that, you need to have an objective recommender who's able to see through your performance and objectively evaluate you for things and give you the feedback for you to improve on.
Yeah.
That is going to be a little bit harder with entrepreneurship, but I've seen successful cases with past clients who've been able to dig up these types of anecdotes from recommenders who are, as I mentioned, either clients, investors, or something equivalent.
Yeah. I investors, I think, is probably of the ones you've said, investors is the one I like to see the most. I had I mean, the epitome, the kind of flagship example of this for me is a client I worked with last year who got into Stanford as an entrepreneur. Basically, the bar can't be really any higher, right? Stanford gets all of the
Uh-huh.
West Coast entrepreneurs, the tech entrepreneurs around the world, actually. To get admitted to Stanford as a tech entrepreneur It's about as hard as it gets. And one of our clients last year got admitted to Stanford as a tech entrepreneur, and they used an investor as their recommender and really guided the recommender to on the question you refer to, question 2 about constructive feedback. They said, do not give bullshit constructive feedback, right?
Hmm.
This is not a strength kind of packaged as a weakness. We invested because he works really, really hard. But that can also be a weakness because his mental health bullshit, right? That
Yeah.
kind of stuff, it just doesn't fly. If you can get an investor to be your recommender and they can give constructive feedback that shows that you respond well to input from other people, you're the kind of entrepreneur that's going to thrive during an MBA.
Hmm.
You're going to
Hmm.
get bombarded with feedback during an MBA. If you're the kind of person that throws the toys out of the pram because you can't handle the feedback, business school doesn't want you. So I would say an investor that reassures on your ability to take criticism, that's the dream. Yeah.
I'm with you 100%.
Nice. Okay. So I think the point on this then was M7 and also targeting these frankly very competitive Knight Hennessy type scholarships. Do you think that's realistic?
Well, I mean, to put it simply, OP has to walk first before he can run and before he can fly. I would recommend getting the academics sorted out because a lot of scholarships are they take into account your academics, notably your test score. And so going back to your question, Sam, about MSET chances for M7, it really comes down to that GMAT or the GRE, which is going to work really hard. And when I mean really hard, it's got to be 330 plus
Mm, wow.
for GRE and a 695, 685 plus for the GMAT.
Wow. To offset that GPA.
Correct.
Wow. Yeah, I'm seeing that Knight Hennessy, and I'm just wary of this flag we often see, which is international applicants. And I'm assuming OP is an international applicant because they talk about my home country. I don't think Americans would write like that. So it's a international applicant already talking about scholarships quite early in the process. That to me is wary. Why? American business schools are not bringing in international applicants for as charity work, right? They're bringing them in to pay the bills. Now,
Hmm.
yes, there are scholarships available for internationals, but if you go into this as an international applicant hoping for a full ride scholarship or, really demanding on the scholarship front, it's just not a good look and it's not doing your chances any favors. So, OP, before you start asking about Knight Hennessy's, get the GMAT. I think that's the approach. Okay. Right. We've been critical enough on that one. Let's keep moving. So this candidate, it has a BTEC, Manipal Institute of Technology. I don't think that was on your list that you mentioned before, John. 8.27 out of 10 CGPA, 4 years of work experience as an engineer at Samsung with a promotion. GRE 327, high quant score, low verbal. Focus edition 695. Transportation volunteer at Karnataka Forest. Not sure exactly what that involves, but volunteering in current, organized hackathons, national level Scrabble player. We should put them in touch with the national level chess player and ultimate Frisbee player we had before. Talk about niche interests. Served as an international liaison in an organization that facilitates internships abroad during undergrad. Hoping to get into product management or tech strategy post MBA, applying to McCombs, Tepper, ISB, Stern, and Rice. We'll decide R2 based on how that goes. Any honest feedback, any honest tips appreciated. Should I consider taking my GMATs again, given that I belong to an overrepresented category? Okay. How do you see that profile, John?
I I like this profile as well. Some categories especially. I would think academically it's fine. It's a fairly strong CGPA. I would say Manipal is a solid school. It's the other MIT, although it's not an MIT. I would say for T15 to T20 schools, which is what OP is aiming for, I think that's okay. That 695 is fine. I would say, in most cases, I would leave it, but yeah, for that minority, I would hope it starts with a 7, even for the Focus Edition. We can talk a little bit about that, Sam, but that's my stance. Demographically, ORM, I would say the fact that he works with a Korean company, I think it would be great if they could weave that out. What this sort of um, what stakeholder relationships he was able to manage out of a culture different from his own. Extracurriculars wise, I think I would focus on the leadership experiences here. They're pretty good. The international liaison, organizing hackathons. I worked with a Google software engineer, and I made sure half of his resume was devoted to extracurriculars and dumbed down the technical language in his resume and focus on impact. And that's what we really want to see from engineers. And we can talk a little bit about how to do that, Sam. Well, extracurriculars I think are going to be what extracurriculars extracurriculars is what's going to really help OP stand out. Professionally, Samsung is a top brand. I would focus again on impact, going above and beyond the scope of his role, less about being an individual contributor as well. Goals wise, I would focus on the why. I mean, the path seems natural to go into PM. That's what everyone wants to do. Tell us what your mission is and what problems you want to solve and go from there. Overall, I think it's a pretty realistic profile for the school list. I like this guy. But, please convince me that you're not just another engineer. Convince me that you get the passion for something in the world you want to solve and that you are the person for it.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting case where OP, and we see this quite a lot. OP has a GRE and GMAT. Did one, thought, oh, maybe I'm better suited to the other, took the other. And we often see this. Should OP submit both? And how does that affect their chances?
Well, I think once upon a time, GREs were a little bit less common, and that meant that the GRE equivalent for the GMAT tended to be lower, right? And what that meant was, for a school would say our average, our mean GMAT, let's say let's use the old edition for a second. It's like a 720, 730. And then you'll see that their average for the GRE is a 325, which translates to about a 700 or just below that, right? And so what that indicates is that schools were a little bit more lenient on the GRE. Now, more people are taking the GRE nowadays. I think that number went from about 30% to almost parity in for some of the schools. And so I would say this score is roughly about equal. I think there's no harm in submitting both scores simply because they're quite similar to each other in terms of tier. And it also shows that OP has taken 2 different tests, and that's an example of commitment to the process. So I think I will probably submit both. Sam, what
If
are your
you
thoughts?
if you're an adcom and you're sitting on this as you were and as an admissions reader and you're seeing both scores, let's say one of them is a little bit higher than the other. In this case, as you say, they're more or less equal. But let's say that they weren't. Let's say one of them is higher by
Hmm.
a few points.
Okay.
Should OP still submit both and get that commitment bonus, as you say, or
Hmm.
does having a lower one on there undermine their intelligence? How does the school actually treat it? And by the way, which one do they submit to the rankings?
That's a good point. I don't know that.
Okay.
I don't know if OP submits both, whether they have to report both, or whether they pick the one that they want to report.
Right.
And I'm sure, and that's a good question and a good follow-up for us to look into, Sam. But look, at the end of the day, if the GRE equivalent is the same as the GMAT, I would take the GRE over the GMAT. If it's and that obviously answers your question if the GRE equivalent is a few points higher, I would take the GRE instead. I
Okay.
would take the higher score.
Okay. Let's talk about the extracurriculars. You mentioned that these are going to carry a lot of weight because OP is I think it's fair to say, Indian engineer, with solid academics, but nothing outstanding. So the extracurriculars are going to be really important. How would you frame these extracurriculars? Of the ones you see, which ones do you think carry the most weight? And can you give us an example of how OP can monetize those in terms of essays?
I think in terms of extracurriculars that has a true tie to OP's passion, it's probably the hackathons. But I think there's an undercurrent of rallying people towards a cause that could work really well. And I'm looking specifically as international liaison and transportation volunteer, especially if OP is in charge of a team of people, or if not in charge of a team of people, has to work, has to influence without authority. That's gonna be really that's gonna help OP shine in some ways. I think it's a way to show that they can work well across functions, that they can work well with people, and they can influence them towards something.
I'd like to see them link that to the mission, to the post MBA goals. So product management, influencing people without authority, that's classic. So if you do go with product management as your goal, maybe focusing on an extracurricular that demonstrates lots of the skills you'll need as a product manager, that's a really nice fit, nice way to do it. Yeah. Okay. My feeling on these schools, John, is that I think OP might have been a little bit conservative, maybe on these. I mean, yeah, certainly a focused edition of 695 is above the average of, I think, Tepper and McCombs for sure. Rice, I think, as well. So you could argue that OP's been a bit conservative in terms of schools. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that's a very realistic list. I think OP can probably look at other maybe a T10 or two. I'm looking
Hmm.
specifically maybe at or maybe a T15. I'm looking specifically potentially at Ross. I'm also looking at maybe Yale, especially if OP's mission is a little bit more ESG focused. I think that could be a school that works well with their mission as well. And so, absolutely, these schools have a strong toe into tech. Um, I would also take a look at potentially considering the tech MBA programs, which are one-year programs that, will totally get OP to their goal in whether it's product management or tech strategy, although I do prefer product management for OP. They're one-year programs. They have largely the same application as they do for the MBA programs, and they have great resources to get you there. And they're offered by schools like NYU, Stern, as well as Cornell. And the Cornell program has, obviously offers the opportunity for applicants for students to study in their New York City campus. And I've helped a bunch of people get into both schools, Sam. So.
Nice plug there. No, but I love it. I agree. I think those are exactly the right schools that OP should be considering. I think, frankly, if you don't get any offers from these in round one, I think you've done something wrong. So I think yes, reassess the type of school you're applying to, and maybe that includes tech MBAs, but also maybe just reassess fundamentally your application because something has gone wrong if you don't get an admit to any of these. I think, and reassessing how you framed your career narrative, whether you're coming across as emotionally intelligent, which is a classic engineer gap, and maybe get in touch on that. I think there's something that you'd definitely be a candidate to sort of reshape and reposition if you don't get any admits in round one. Let us know how that goes. Okay, John, um, on the career narrative. You talked about focusing on why and on the impact that OP's had.
Mhm.
Can you give us a couple more examples of what a good why looks like for an engineer?
I think it boils down to personal stake in an issue, right? I, it can range from, the hiring practices at these tech companies are broken and I want to change it from a strategy point of view. I worked on this, or let's say another narrative can be, I worked on this um, bug fix at Samsung, and I realized this was part of a much larger problem that people were neglecting, and this disproportionately impacts people in of a certain from a certain industry or something specific, and I want to change that, but I need a skill set to go from what I'm doing now in order to be in the right position to affect change to affect change.
Great examples. Okay, last question. Should they reattempt the GMAT? They've got a 695 currently, and they've got the GRE. Should they take it again?
You know what, Sam? I think most people are going to say no, but I would like to see what OP does. And if OP's practice tests are ranging in the low 700s, I would say go for it.
Yeah. So if you think, I mean, they obviously think they can get it higher because they're asking the question,
Oh,
right?
then absolutely. Absolutely.
If OP is maxed out, never doing the GMAT again, they're not going to ask, should I take it again? So it
Sure.
sounds like OP,
Yeah.
you're probably scoring higher in your practice tests. You've left a bit on the table there. And if you combine a higher GMAT score with some slightly more punchy applications to the Cornell Tech MBA of the world, I think it's a really good path. And I think hopefully some good outcomes for you.
Yep.
Cool. All right, John, last profile. Chances at T20, T30. With round two just around the corner, I'm looking to see how strong my applications are, blah, blah, blah. Okay, 26-year-old white male. GMAT 615 on the first attempt. Bachelor's in management from a Midwest state school with a 3.27 GPA. The reason for that was getting called up for military drills during the pandemic while studying. So quite a strong reason, I think. Professional experience, 4 years so far, all electrical construction industry, a couple of years in project management, built, work, like looks like the margins and the size of the projects is fairly hefty, fairly substantial. Also has sales experience and military experience in the Marine Corps Reserve. 7 years there at matriculation. So it sounds like OP has got, if I understand this right, 7 years of Marine Corps experience plus 4 years of professional work experience in electrical construction. I think we might be looking at 11 years total at matriculation. So certainly an older applicant. Vanderbilt, Notre Dame, Kelly, Cornell, MSU Broad are the target schools being discussed. How do you see that profile?
I think it's a classic. I mean, obviously, they're a good they're a wealth of vets applying to the business school. I think there's a wide spectrum of them as well. We'll start academically. I think OP, there's some challenges there, but I think the challenges, as you've pointed out, Sam, are very reasonable, especially if OP clearly explains it in his optional essay. Demographically, white male, late 20s, military background, lots of people similar. And so it's really going to come down to how OP stands out among that poll. I don't see any mention of extracurriculars, so I won't go there. Professionally, white male in sales, right? That's one, way that admissions folks will perceive you. But I think that this line here contributed to the company's highest annual profits in history. I love that. I think they need to be front and center. I work with a fair number of sales folks, and it's common it's easy for admissions to kind of view them as talkers, not having much experience with strategy or analytics, and that's typically far from it because first of all, the higher up you go in the organization, the more you have to rely on sales to sell an idea across an organization. And that, in my view, is a key ingredient of leadership. And if OP focuses on that, that's going to help him stand out. And we'll talk a little bit about strategy there. But, weeding out evidence of strategy, keywords like a business case is what's going to really help strengthen the professional side of this profile. The goals make sense for me. I think LDPs is what you and I would probably recommend for someone with OP's background. So no further comment there. Overall, I think there's potential. I think the school is realistic, but OP will need to really sell the vision hard and really try and find a way to reposition or augment that work experience beyond just a work in sales.
Yeah, interesting. So you mentioned the LDP. The goals are mentioned in the comments down here. I'm targeting leadership development programs in the Midwest. So that's actually quite a good goal, isn't it? Okay, thanks for that, John. So if like the first thing I see when I see this profile is a military applicant, fine, there's lots of them, but with also pretty good professional experience. Right. So this isn't I've been in the military and now I'm transitioning into the civilian
Hmm.
world, haven't really done anything, still talks quite naively about learning about business. We see a lot of those sorts of military applicants. This one has already got some professional work experience, quite solid from what we're seeing, but older. How are schools going to look at that military experience stint, overall age, contribution to the cohort? How are schools going to perceive this? I mean, basically, the average MBA work experience is like 5 years. OP has double
Hmm.
that. Are they still in with a chance?
I would say so. Look, I think if you were to segment the average age of people matriculating in business school by function, you'll find a lot of folks who are maybe like younger consultants, sponsor consultants, et cetera. But a lot of what's driving the age gradual increase in average age in business schools is going to be those military applicants. In my class, personally, many of the military applicants were in their early to mid 30s already. And I think that speaks strongly to how why it's justified to pursue an MBA at this point in their career. And to your point, Sam, OP doesn't just have pure military experience, also has a little bit of experience in the workforce. And I think that's what's going to help justify why schools will take an older applicant, because that applicant doesn't just have military experience, but also something that has something to offer beyond military experience. And I think that net that's a good thing. I think they will note the age, of course, but I think this is not going to be as big of a concern.
Yeah, I'd echo that. Now I think about it, lots of the military, the veterans in our MBA cohort were slightly older as well. And also, we see this often with clients from countries with military, where they have to do military
Right.
service. The Koreans, for example, that we work with have often got a few years of military service.
Mhm.
It's the same, and they still have success in business school applications. So I think the key takeaway here is as a veteran, you can get away with having more experience, and that's not going to undermine you. Okay, how does this optional essay look? Can you just, I know we've done this many times before, but can you just kind of walk through how you think a good optional essay looks to address this GPA?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, well, ideally, OP has uh, applies with a third or fourth GMAT attempt with a score higher than 615. But the best case
Let's
scenario
say that's the
is,
case because he says
yeah,
first attempt. So I think that we're insinuating there that there's going to be another attempt come through where
sure,
they maybe score 655 or somewhere
yeah,
a few points higher.
sure.
Let's assume
Yeah.
that happens. How should the optional essay look?
My GPA is not an accurate reflection of my ability to handle the rigors of an MBA program. Um, during my time at Midwest State School, I was involved in, describe the situation. And, frequently this took me away from attending class, attending, opportunity to take tests. And as a result, my GPA tanked during the time when the involvement with the military reserve was the heaviest. Instead, please look to this other year when I had a higher GPA during the semester, and also please look to my GMAT score of 655, fingers crossed, which is a better reflection of my academic ability. I'm also happy to speak to my facility with quantitative and financial work from, these two projects at work.
I love it. And maybe
There's,
you want to go as far as calling out specific classes on the transcript, which
of
overlap
course.
with a particular drill, right?
Right.
I had a C in XYZ class because when that exam or the
Mhm.
week before that exam, I was deployed to so and so, or we
Yeah.
did a drill to so and really draw that connection super closely. Great. Very useful. Thanks. Okay. The The question then around goals. Let's just touch on this one more time. Military applicants. There's a certain sort of group of goals that they often focus on. Talk to me about the classic goals that you see military applicants choosing.
Typically it's I want to work in government and improve a process within the way something's run. Or if it's not in government, I see a lot of people who want to go into operations management or working in um, brand management with sort of consumer packaged goods companies. I've also seen people going into consulting into different specific sectors. Those come to mind, Sam. Are there any that I'm missing?
Yeah, I think I would be encouraging OP to research schools that seem to, sorry, companies that seem to have a particular inclination towards hiring veterans. Amazon
Mm-hmm.
jumps to mind, right? You look at Amazon's hiring stats. The Amazon Pathways program specifically is almost designed to hire vets out of MBA programs. So I would just say that as a veteran, focus on your writing your MBA application essays with goals to join companies that have a history and a track record of hiring veterans out of MBA programs. Amazon Pathways should be your first thing you go on Google, first thing you research. And then the other thing I would say for this particular candidate is they have this unique commercial experience as well. And failing all else, what they could easily say is something like, I'm going to join a leader in the electrical construction sector as a, insert slightly more sexy role here,
Mm-hmm.
strategist at a electrical construction company. That would also be a very clear post MBA role for this person. Nice. Okay, John, we have a bonus question today, which is a financial slash ethical classic MBA question that we get a lot on Reddit threads, which is I'm 25-year-old working in finance. Our comp is 150K base, 150 bonus. So it might be taking in 300K next year. I work in a very niche part of finance that doesn't actually interest me. I'm considering applying for a top MBA program and maybe going to business school if I get in. I think they're emotionally hedging their bets here a little bit. Okay. My goal reasoning is that it could help me recruit for a different part of the industry that excites me a bit more. It would also be a personal reset life-wise, which would be nice. My dream is to one day launch my own fund, and I think an elite MBA could help with fundraising. No mention of I might actually learn something, but fine. That being said, on paper, I think it seems crazy to quit my job. I'm losing about $1 million by quitting my job now and paying for an MBA. A lot of people do it just to get a job that I have. Is this insane? What do you think?
Well, OP, I mean, making clearing 300K when you're 25 years old. I mean, I mean, it's, I mean, pretty cushy gig there. Although I would say what what you mentioned stood out, Sam, which is, no mention of learning anything. I think business schools, especially, in the upper echelons, are great places for networking and add legitimacy to the work that you're doing, whether you're trying to court an investor or co-founder, etc. But I think for the MBA to be worthwhile, OP will need to be invested in more than just one thing. And that one thing appears to just be getting a network. If OP is interested in obviously a reset and it makes sense, but it's also a reset that is $250,000 plus, right? And so if OP can find a different reason, a reason, like three strong reasons beyond just the network, or three total, I think there's your answer. I would say if OP can earn this amount of money pre-MBA, then OP can probably earn a similar amount post-MBA as well. And in the long term, that $1 million is probably not going to be as consequential as as you think it. I mean, as you think it is. And moreover, I think OP is a little young. I think OP can probably afford to uh, time the market a little bit more, or try and see if he can raise money or meet those people in his network beforehand before he makes that decision.
Yeah. Interesting. I think I see this as two parts. I see this as one, should they, from a financial perspective? But also, two, is are they at the best time to get the admit? There's a big assumption here that you're going to get admitted into Harvard. Like there's
Mhm.
there's that huge assumption. I think firstly, from a financial perspective, I think I would say make hay while you can, because this niche area of finance that you're in might not exist forever, right? We've seen boom and busts where entire areas of finance get wiped out overnight. And so there's no guarantee that this particular industry is even going to exist longer term. So one, from a financial perspective, I'm thinking make hay. You're young, you're 25, you can make hay for a couple of years, get yourself financially solid, and then go and do an MBA. But I think too is from a like chances of getting admitted perspective, I'm going to be blunt. OP doesn't sound particularly mature in terms of the skills, right? Nowhere here are they mentioning it's getting taking a break, a life reset, it's a nice network, it's time off from work, it's nothing about learning. And I think they'll get caught out in the application process. I think that lack of
Mhm.
maturity and that lack of curiosity that Harvard literally have an essay about, I don't think that's like they're in the best place maturity wise to benefit
Mhm.
from the MBA. And I think that'll get called out in the application process. And I think that the if you combine those two, applying when OP is, for example, maybe 27 years old, been through a financial cycle, right? Been through some life experience, I think the chances of getting admitted and the economics of going to business school, both of them improve. So that's what I'd be.
Mhm. I'm with you on that, Sam.
Cool. Good stuff. So anybody watching who enjoyed today's roast, please get in touch. If you would like your profile roasted, send it over. Where you can DM us on Reddit, and we will do our best to include your profile in the future roasts. And if you enjoyed today's roast, also don't forget to like and subscribe to Sandwich Consulting YouTube channel. We do these roasts every week, whether it's with John or with Mal or anyone else in the team, every week, and we're putting them out regularly. And we are constantly looking for for new content to roast. So, John, thank you very very much for joining me today, and I will see you in probably 2 weeks' time or so.
Happy trail, Sam.
Amazing. Take care, sir.